Hi everybody, this is Leo Volont and this is part 4, the final part of my Creating a Better God series. I once read an amusing, if blasphemous, anecdote that goes back to one of the earliest civilizations, the Sumerian. It seems that one citizen had discerned a paradox. On one hand, the Sumerian people were being asked to offer valuable sacrificial offerings to their God. But they were also being asked to pay that God homage, worship, devotion, adoration, and respect. In effect, their God was at the same time begging while expecting the people to be the ones to do the bowing. So there, written on one of those small clay tablets they used, was the thought that if God had to beg his food like a dog, then God should be whipped and taught to do tricks for his dinner just like any other dog. You know, perhaps there's a hint of truth there, so let's stay with that Mesopotamian metaphor for a while. That is, comparing God to man's best friend. What if God really needed to be trained, cultivated, and nourished, not being seen at his best unless treated as a cherished pet, and given a certain degree of discipline and character formation? Already in the third video of this series, we established that we are God's creators and not the other way around. But now we will look at what the job of creation might entail. You know, we couldn't really expect much of this divinity if left to itself. Remember that since the universe must have once had a starting point in time, well, how could a fresh brand new divinity formed up from out of bare rock know anything of the kind of social moral issues we would confront today in trying to raise up a life organization as complicated as a civilization? Left to itself, wouldn't the dog just remain a wolf? But yes, with this new intuitive insight we have of God and religion being a formative ongoing project, well, it may help us to better understand our religious history and our own religious current events. When a civilization can get together in a common prayer and a common religious vision, then in a sense, divinity solidifies. With so many people thinking similarly, the collective consciousness crystallizes a divinity expressive of the people's moral consensus. The divinity created is a collective phenomena. But what happens when barbarism and rugged individualism reigns? What happens when education breaks down and all unifying culture collapses in skepticism or just plain ignorance? Well, if there ever had been a divinity, then the divine simply evaporates away, dying a little more as each generation pays less and less heed. Yes, each individual may have his own religion and his own sense of divinity, but without the multiplier effect of common communal belief, then each person's separate divinity is too small to matter. It is like 100 million batteries, if wired together, would outsurge a lightning bolt. But just one little single-cell battery by itself isn't enough to run a toy. But in ages and cultures that had a great degree of religious unity and intensity, then a certain amount of power was communicated into the spirit world, and that power became manifested in saints who found a way to tap into it. And then there were the much acclaimed spiritual apparitions and visions, supported by a sizable public consensus, which are probably best compared to condensations of ethereal plasmas. Or if we are hesitant to attribute any quality of matter to the spirit, then we can stipulate that these manifestations of spirit are phenomena of consciousness, that these divine apparitions may consist in the quasi-substance of what we would otherwise call delusion or hallucination. You know, the substance of dreams, of visions, the spark that gives substance to our intuitive flashes. Remember, delusions and hallucinations are objective in the sense that they arise of themselves, outside of our power or ability to consciously design or fabricate them. We shouldn't confuse hallucination with imagination, which is self-guided and willful and no more revelatory than if we were talking to ourselves. So we can say that imagination comes from the shallowest part of ourselves. Visions come from the deepest, and there they may very well be linked to the collective. But if we accept that the spiritual is secondary to the material, then there are serious theological consequences to such thinking. First, we can decide that the polytheists were right, or more right than the monotheists. The truth is that there probably was a contest between competing non-transcendental gods, that is, between the spiritual visions of competing peoples. The greatest God would be that God with the greatest sum total of collective intensity supporting it. But such gods would not necessarily be mutually exclusive. The top of Mount Olympus was like a country club estate, with new members like Hercules and Theseus moving in all the time. The polytheist nations each had a pantheon of gods, and from country to country it became understood that certain gods described so similarly that it became generally assumed that they were the same divinities going by different names. For instance, the Greek Ares was Rome's Mars, and then we have the couplets of Athena Minerva, Artemis Diana, Aphrodite Venus, and the list goes on. Heck, I even had a dream of Artemis Diana. To find out more about it, see my video, The Faculty of True Discernment. That's a good one. Yes, at that most extreme level where God becomes thoughtless and unmodified, you know, just pure unelaborated spirit, the Transcendental God we were talking about in part 2. Well, yes, that God would have a certain sameness. After all, how many different ways are there of describing nothingness? But also, at this level, as stated before, God would be providentially useless, or worse than useless, as in the Buddhist sense of encouraging nihilism by rewarding the pursuit of those who value nothing in this wonderful world of ours. Buddha had said, "Desire is the source of all suffering." Well, is that supposed to be a religion with any kind of moral guidance? Really, the desire Buddha would stomp out is also the wellspring of all that is good and beautiful, isn't it? So yes, we must remember what our Mesopotamian friend said 4,000 or 5,000 years ago, that God is our dog, and if we are to feed him, then he must learn to do a few tricks and be useful to us. That means that religions need to be useful. A religion that gets in our way needs to be cleared out of the way. And people need to be useful too, if not to others, then at least to themselves. Useful to some ideal, some art, something. The ultimate meaning of life may just consist in making things better than the way we found them. The unifying ideal that brings us together may be more than just loving each other, but loving what we do. You know, a humanity striving for excellence in every facet, and then appreciating each other for having achieved it. In the same way that particles of iron dust are lined up and made coherent by the invisible influence of a magnet, so we can envision so many billions of individual persons being made into a coherent civilization by a compelling, deterministic, collective undercurrent that animates all our thoughts and feelings. But such a collective impulse can only gain sufficient force through an overwhelming public consensus and the power of mass belief. The more we can all agree in our moral vision, the more coherent our collective divinity will become. Does this mean that religion is of our own creation and not a matter of divine revelation? Well, yes and no. I believe our collectively created vision would in time crystallize in the astral spiritual realms as an objectively accessible collective consciousness, and that in an age to come, our young people will have dreams and visions of ideals we have still yet to place in their way. Okay, well, that's my series. Thank you all very much. Hope to make something for you again soon. Thank you.